Hi, today we're going to talk about a course designed for resident managers called Residential Manager Emergency Response Team. It's a course that we're going to talk about. It's a different course than anything that I've experienced before. It's not talking about building infrastructure necessarily. It's not talking about how boilers are run or how to repair something or, dealing with building staff. It's actually about what to do in the event of an emergency. And we talk about not just any emergency, chemical disaster or terrorism or some sort of natural disaster. It's a class about what to do in those really catastrophic moments and how to respond to them, what to do, how to save people, how to, there's it's just a whole bunch of things that I thought would be a great addition to all of the great things that resident managers have to do in the course of the day. They have to wear many hats, and I think this is a great hat for them to wear. It's not only for resident managers. I'm putting this out there because I think it's great for all types of building staff, maintenance staff, porters, handyman, doorman, you name it. I think anyone can benefit off of this. Today we're going to be interviewing one of the founders of this course, Hank Wisner. We're going to get to meet pretty soon. The other is a gentleman named Peter Morici, who co-founded this with Hank. And hopefully he'll be joining us in the future. And basically, Mr. Morici has a long, illustrious life in law enforcement and as an instructor. He's been an instructor at FEMA, that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He's also instructed for the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Domestic Preparedness, various weapons of mass destruction, Department of Energy. He's recently retired from the New York City Police Department, where he's just done so many things, and you can see his credentials on the website RMERT, RMERT.com, RMERT as Hank calls it. Just to let you know, I'm not affiliated with this course. I'm not paid by them. If you want to give it to me, that's a different story. We can talk, but I'm just kidding. I met Hank while I was serving as a resident manager at a building, and over the course of the time that I've gotten to know him, I just learned a lot about this class. I've learned a lot about Hank, and I just thought it was a great class. So anyway, sit back, enjoy, and if you do want to take this course, reach out to us at the end of the class. You have the website, RMERT website. You also have my email, and we'll get some great classes going. Good morning, Super. Okay, today we have a guest here who's been in this industry for quite a while, and you may or may not know him. But one of the things that this person does is he teaches a course. He has crafted a course for resident managers. His name is Henry Wisner. Is that okay as an intro?
That's fine.
Are you sure? Okay. I can always cut things out, so don't worry.
That's all right.
So we're actually catching Jennifer here. Jennifer's our usual, she's a presence on our podcast. She's like the moderator of all of, I don't know if you've listened to the other episodes, but Jennifer's on with me, and we usually shoot together. So today she's on, she stayed extra to help moderate this this podcast. So,
Okay.
all right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So this is Hank. By the way, this is Jennifer.
Hello,
Hi, Jennifer.
Hank.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you virtually. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Hank. We really appreciate this, and I know that we're taking. But I was just saying that. Do you mind if I say Hank? Because I've always known you as Hank.
Most people know me as Hank.
Okay, so I'm gonna use Hank. So Hank, we're actually fortunate enough to catch Hank on his boat,
Oh, really?
and so I've had the fortune of getting a tour of this boat, and it's a world that I've never known, but now I'm very curious about it, and I want to get one myself.
Or you can come up and visit. The best thing to have is a friend that has a boat.
That's true. My dad used to say that.
That's very wise comment.
Yeah, that's a wise comment.
Yep.
It's like saying, yeah, you don't want this burden. You just wanna have a friend who carries this burden.
Right.
Well, hopefully, actually, that's the same thing I was going to say about your course. So just like your boat, it's great to know you because you've put this course together for how many years? 15 years?
Since 2003.
Since 2003, so even longer. So the logistics of putting together a course is extremely difficult, and having a friend that has a passion for teaching and for training and for putting this together, it's just like enjoying a friend with a boat. You get to enjoy the good stuff without without all the hard work that goes behind the classes.
It's a lot of hard work.
Okay, great. So we have Hank on Zoom here, and I think there's a lot of I think in this industry there's a lot of resident managers who know this course, and I've actually seen the certificates. I've seen them in resident managers' offices, and I've seen them display them proudly. But I also know that there's a lot of people in building trades that are not resident managers, such as building porters and handyman, and also part-time super industry. So there's a lot of people in these smaller buildings that don't know about this class. So I kind of wanted to introduce Hank and this class to them as well. So the class is called, I'm just going to put it up here. The class is called, Hank, you're not going to see this, but it's RMERT. It's the Residential Manager Emergency Response Team. And Hank, do you want to talk about this and let us know what this class is about?
Yeah. It started as a result of 9/11. Actually, it started out in California with what they call CERT teams, which helped the fire department put out fires. When they had fires out in California, the fire department wanted extra help, logistics, water, and they were the first ones who started it in the 80s. I think it was the 84 they started it, and many states have them. New York State didn't have them until we sort of pushed them along. And it was after 9/11 that a general, a friend of mine, Sid Baumgarten, who was working during 9/11, decided that it would be good to have these teams in New York City. They were 8-hour courses. They were 8-hour lectures. So it was once a week for a couple of hours, and we expanded it mostly to the real estate industry, to some police department people take the course. My partner is just retired police officer and he's been teaching these types of courses for a long time. And between the synergy of my knowledge of working in emergency management with other countries and his knowledge and General Baumgarten's knowledge, we put together this course. I had a lot of help from a lot of people who volunteered their time to give lectures on specific subjects. And what I'd like to do today is to go over in a little bit of detail the itinerary of the course, so people could understand what the course is about. Mostly real estate people take the course. It's not only resident managers, it's porters and supers and building staff, property managers. It's companies that deal with mitigating disasters or responding to disasters like ServPro or companies like that. It's also the medical reserve team takes the course. I've had Coast Guard people take the course. So it's not only specifically for resident managers, but basically we're dealing with resident managers. So a 15-week course, and I'll start with the first class and go through those, what we do each week.
Okay, great.
Before we go on, I mean, thank you very much for the introduction. That sounds wonderful. I just had one question. Do you think this is important for building supers or people who work in this industry to learn about this course?
Yeah, because the first thing that anyone does when there's an emergency, whether it's a natural disaster or terrorism or a mass casualty disaster or a personal disaster of somebody falling in their apartment, is they call 911.
Right.
But 911's response time is usually weather dependent, and during mass casualty events, it could be hours before professional emergency rescuers come to the scene. So they have to triage what's going on in mass casualty events, and you could be put in the back of the list. They have to help the largest number of people that they possibly can first. So if you have 5 or 6 people in a building that's injured and needs attention, that may be hours before they get to them.
I see.
They're the first they're real first responders after they call 911. And there are a lot of medical emergencies that happen through the year, especially in large buildings.
And also, I guess resident managers, superintendents they're the people with the most knowledge about the building, infrastructure, utilities lines, how to stop something, how to mitigate a building-wide emergency, where all the routes are in the building.
Exactly. How to turn off the electricity, how to turn on the electricity, how to use a generator to store medicine that people, if there's no electricity in the building and they're running a generator, there are certain medications that people get to put in the refrigerator that the resident manager will store, or he's the incident commander of that building. That's the way we look at the residential as a residential manager.
Okay, great. Then let's hear about the curriculum then.
Okay, so the class normally starts in September.
I'm gonna actually, Hank, I'm gonna put up your website as a baseline. Okay.
Okay, sure. And I'll go through each one of these classes so they can, and I'll be talking about what happens in each class. So as you're doing that, the first class is really an introduction. It introduces the lecturers that we hire during the class. And they talk about why they're teaching the class, what their experience is. A lot of our lecturers are residential managers that have experience in EMS before they were, for instance, a resident manager, or have some military or search and rescue experience.
Wow, that's awesome.
Or firefighters that became resident managers at some point in time. So we try to use a lot of resident managers as lecturers, as well as professional people as well. So the first part of the class is getting together the class, getting together the students, going over the logistics of the class, the timing of the class, from 6 to whatever time it may end. And the first thing that we do is we talk about terrorism, the definition of terrorism, and how terrorism doesn't kill a lot of people. It tries to produce fear and change people's lifestyles, or try to hit economic centers. Right. Like during 9/11, that was a big whack to our to our economy when those buildings went down, beside the loss of life, which was, of course, paramount. So we talk a little bit about what terrorism really means, and how during the, 13 years that Ray Kelly was the police commissioner, how he changed the police department, and what resident managers could look for in terms of alerting the police department and working with the police department if they suspect that there is terrorism. Let me give you an example. If a building manager has a false alarm in a building where someone calls the fire department outside of the building, and the fire department comes to check out the building and finds that there's nothing wrong with the building, a month goes by and the same thing may happen, and they park in the same place, and the fire department has 3 or 4 incidents where a building where someone is calling a fire in a building, and
false alarm.
That's acts of terrorism to the fire department, because they now know that somebody's watching where they're putting their equipment, and which will be attacked or used. They know the routine that the fire department is using, or the police department is using, by a lot of false alarms. Wow. So resident managers really should know what's going on in their building, how many times there are false alarms going off in their building. It has a great deal, terrorism has a great deal of relevance to resident managers in that respect. Also in natural disasters. I remember on Wall Street and Water Street, that whole area was affected during Sandy, right, and Battery Park City as well. A lot of people took the trouble in the real estate industry of moving their boilers and their electrical panels to a higher floor so it wouldn't be flooded out. So floods are a big concern in certain areas of the city, and the resident managers have to know how to staff their people during a flood, how long to keep them on, what equipment, how to feed them, how to care for them, how to do overtime on these natural disasters. So natural disasters in different parts of the city, especially floods, is a big deal, and both economically and to the people in the building.
Right, and also
most of the time, if there's an evacuation order, the resident manager, and we task the resident manager, we convince the resident manager to try to get rid of as many people, to evacuate as many people ahead of a storm. Because this way it becomes much easier to care for the people who don't evacuate.
So
they
these,
know where they are,
right.
and they can cater to them and
So
have logistics in place.
So this is also about giving the proper response to natural disasters like Hurricane Sandy.
Exactly. With hurricanes and floods, we know ahead of time
Right.
where it's going to hit,
Okay.
what the tide's going to be,
Right.
how high the tide's going to be, how much flooding is going to be, what the wind is going to be.
But I don't.
All affect certain areas. It's very important as an incident commander, as a residential manager, to try to convince people to evacuate when they're told to evacuate. Not all people will evacuate, but the relationship that the resident manager has with the residents are important in terms of helping to enforce or to promote evacuations. The least people he has in the building, the better he can respond to the boiler and to other areas. During natural disasters, the resident managers, one of the things we do, we teach them, if the lights are out, with lighting, with lanterns, with battery-operated lanterns. So if the electricity goes out, old people, and there's no elevator, they don't have to walk down to the lobby and walk back to get something.
Right.
So that usually on every fifth floor, we try to promote them to have tables available so that the food, water, and lighting,
Right.
And maybe even a radio on those in high-rise buildings. So we go into a lot about natural disasters and how resident managers could mitigate that before
Right.
it happens, and what to do during the event in terms of staffing, and what to do after
Right.
the event. And mostly after the event, the property managers get involved with insurance companies. But it's very important for the resident manager to be able to take steps to help those people during those natural disasters, which are usually floods and hurricanes and that type of thing. Sometimes just wind damage, where windows get blown out.
Right.
We also go over a little bit about the infrastructure of a building, but resident managers pretty much know what to do on infrastructure there.
That would be great for porters. They're not as knowledgeable or experienced with that as the resident manager, but they would probably really benefit from that part of the class.
Yeah, they should be on the same page.
Right.
Many of the times, if we're running a course, we have not only the resident manager in the course, but we have 3 or 4 of his staff in the course because they're a team.
Right. Oh yeah, that's great.
Operate as a team.
Right.
So the other thing that's important is evacuation, and there are specific courses I think even that the union gives on evacuating a building. But how to evacuate, where to evacuate to, is really dependent upon the incident that you're trying to get people away from. If it's a chemical attack, you don't want to go you don't want to go downwind into the chemical event. So there's no specific evacuation route that could be pre-planned because it depends upon the surrounding, what's happening in the surrounding area, whether it's a fire or it's a wind event or if it's a chemical attack or a biological attack. So we train the resident managers how to respond to an evacuation depending upon the scenario that takes place. And the last thing that we do in the course is we don't hire, he's a friend of mine. His name is Joe. He's a lawyer. He was a lawyer for the SEC in Wall Street. And he has the unhappy distinction of being involved in 2 terrorist attacks, both at the World Trade Center. He can no longer use his legs or his arms.
Wow.
And it's difficult giving this part of the lecture because he can't project his voice very far. So we have to come up with certain types of amplifiers that we use while he's talking about the Good Samaritan Law.
So Good Samaritan Law meaning...
Good Samaritan Law, whoops, I just moved it. I'm back with you. You see me?
Yep, I see it. Dropped out for a second.
Good Samaritan Law is a law that the United States, that, I don't know if the United States, many countries have, that try to promote civilians to respond to emergencies without the fear of being sued. The Good Samaritan Law comes from the Bible, where there was, in Samaria, there was an attack on someone on a road. I'm not that religious, so I don't know my religion that well, or my Bible that well.
We'll take your word for it.
Yeah, but there was an attack on somebody who was robbed,
Okay.
and a Samaritan, thousands of years ago, came to the aid of this victim.
Okay.
And so they named the law the Good Samaritan Law.
Gotcha.
Every state has different laws on how they respond. We want our residents, we want our resident managers and the building staff to respond to crises,
So,
to emergencies,
right.
safely without getting themselves into trouble,
Okay, as an example, what would that be?
without getting sued. For example, let me give you an example of a true example that happened in the state of Washington. There were two cars following one another going to a party. Young teenagers were in the car. The first car flipped over, and a woman, I think her name was Marie, was in the first car. Her friend, I think her name was Angela, was in the second car. When the first car flipped over, it did a lot of damage to people in the car. Angela went to Marie to try to pull her out of the car. Marie screamed at her not to help her, not to pull her out of the car. And she kept on emphasizing that. Angela kept on pulling her out of the car and did damage to his spine.
You mean against her wishes?
Against her wishes.
Okay.
If somebody tells you, a resident manager, that they don't want help, don't give them help. Because if you do, you're going to get sued. 99% of the time, if a resident manager responds to an emergency, and I'll go over that in my as we're going down the course curriculum, 99% of the time people want the resident manager or the building staff to cater to a medical emergency. First, call 911. But if there's 20 inches of snow on the ground and someone can't breathe, there's going to be a delay in having a professional come on scene.
Right.
So we go over the Good Samaritan Law. What is gross negligence? Let me give you another. In New York State, you could be in a swimming pool, and a 3-year-old could be next to you in 6 feet of water drowning, and there's no legal requirement to reach out to that kid and put him on safe ground.
Really?
You may have there is none.
You
may have a moral obligation
right.
to do that, but not a legal obligation.
So if a child is drowning next to me and I choose not to help, I'm okay.
That's your choice.
But right. I mean, I think it's
You cannot be held legally responsible
okay.
for not helping somebody.
Wow. So
But
right.
in other countries, that's not the case. In Germany, for example, if that were the case,
Right.
you would be legally liable for not helping somebody.
Wow. Okay.
On the water,
Yeah.
off the coast,
Right.
state that you have to help somebody.
Right.
And stay with them as long as it's safe to do so until the Coast Guard arrives.
Right.
So
Okay.
different states have different rules. Generally, we don't want to scare anybody because the Good Samaritan law is to try to encourage civilians to help without facing legal matters. And we just point out what gross negligence is, what not to do, so that building staff feel comfortable in knowing what not to do.
Right.
Another example I'll give you. Somebody calls 911 because they hear someone screaming in their apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning. And they call the resident manager, who comes running up to the apartment and finds a lady, let's say, of 90 years old, who's very frail, most likely has osteoporosis at that age, and fell out of bed and wants to go back into bed. And she's asking for help to put her back into bed.
Right.
She might have broken her femur, and in moving her,
Right.
the resident manager could cut her femoral artery. So we want to make sure that resident managers of building staff know when to move someone and when not to move
Hank,
someone.
why didn't we have this conversation like a year ago when I did move somebody without realizing what I could expose myself to?
Because sometimes you have to move someone.
Yeah, I did.
If a resident manager
Right.
is walking into a room where there's a fire all around them, the walls are falling,
Right.
we teach resident managers how to move those people out regardless if there are spinal injuries. Resident managers can move people or come to their aid without permission if they were unconscious. Unconscious.
Uh-huh.
It's called implied consent.
Okay.
We go over this in the Good Samaritan Law.
Ah.
The law states that a reasonable person
Right.
would want a Good Samaritan to help them
Right.
if they were unconscious.
Right. Right.
So this lecture is very important for building staff and for residents.
I was gonna say because a lot of these buildings do have elderly population, and
Right.
I've been in a few situations where an elderly person who was not ambulatory fell, and I had to help them. And there's a huge rule across the building trades among the staff that you don't, you call the ambulance. But sometimes when you feel like it's so small and you're like, I can just reach down and just help them, and you don't have to go through waiting for the ambulance, you kind of want to jump in and
You do,
just
But I've learned in the service that we don't have X-rays in our eyes,
Okay.
and a lot of times there could be bones that are broken or ligaments that are damaged.
Right.
Especially with elderly people. So the best thing to do is to make them comfortable.
I see.
Unless the circumstances dictate that you have to move them, because if you don't move them, they'll die.
Okay.
Immediately die.
Oh, really? Okay. So there are exceptions. So it's going to be a great
Yeah.
class, a great class that really gives us some framework to act without fear. And I think that's, in a building setting, in like a building staff setting, everyone is, everyone's super careful about about these rules, but I think everyone has their own interpretation of what is legally permissible or not. So I think just hitting this together will help all of us kind of get to the same page.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also to do it with another buddy or another person, just film it on your phone.
Yep. Okay.
That's also a protection for the resident manager.
Gotcha.
Okay, so let's jump into the second class.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Any questions about the first one? What we covered during the first class?
No. Do you have any questions, Jennifer?
No, it's good.
She's riveted in her seat.
Okay, the second class is about fires. If there's one thing that resident managers or building staff are going to be faced more than any other problem, it's going to be fire in an apartment.
Okay.
It's going to be between 6 and 8 o'clock
Mm-hmm.
during the evening, or 5 to 8, 9 o'clock.
When people are home and cooking?
Yeah, when they're cooking, and it's going to be in the kitchen. So about 3 years ago, it was called the Morning Side.
Okay.
To give a presentation about fire and what happened. So let me give you the scenario. This is an incident that happened. It was covered extensively in the news. There was I think he was I forgot his name, I'll call him Abe. He was a retired detective from the New York City Police Department, and he was in his mid-80s. It was about 5 o'clock, and his wife, I'll call her Steele, was put on the stove a frying pan and put oil into the frying pan and lit the stove, the gas stove. She looked down, and right next to her was her garbage was overflowing. The chute where she throws the garbage was right next to her apartment. So she had the good sense of picking up the garbage, unlocking the door to make sure she can get back in right away, throwing the garbage
Uh-oh.
down the chute,
Right.
and then, she wanted to get back into her apartment.
Right.
As she closed that chute door,
Uh-oh.
another door opened with her very best friend screaming and crying that her husband was involved in a serious car accident and was taken to the hospital. The woman was hysterical, and Steele was trying to comfort the woman.
Okay.
Walked into the elevator and tried to say, "Do you need me to drive you to the hospital?" Completely forgetting about the fact that her stove was on with oil on it.
Gotcha.
With a frying pan. So as she walked back to the apartment, she heard an alarm. I think she instinctively knew what had happened. She opened up the door, and the whole apartment was on fire.
Engulfed.
So,
Wow.
Abe lost his life,
Oh no.
and he died. And so as the demographics,
Right.
my point is, as an increasing population,
Right.
the demographics are increasing, you're going to have people that are leaning over stoves, that are elderly, that
Right.
catch part of their clothing on fire, which happened in mutual redevelopment. The lady died there. Most of the incidents that resident managers or building staff are going to be involved in is fire related. Once the fire department is called, the fire department, knowing that they take these courses, are going to ask the resident manager and staff to form a perimeter around the building, so when they're busting the walls and glass, that people can't come through who
Right.
want to come into the building, because their dog is next door in the next apartment that the fire is taking place, and they want to get into the building, and the resident manager and the staff have to prevent that
Right.
from happening.
Right. Right.
But it's the resident manager's responsibility, as well as the building staff's responsibility, to constantly educate their residents about fire safety. People don't read signs in the back of their doors, or signs that in stairwells. A lot of them are unconscious of that. They see that there's a sign, but they never stop to take to read why they should keep those doors closed.
So I noticed that class 2 is like focused on fire, and this is not terrorism necessarily. This is not natural disaster, but it's human error that can cause something catastrophic like this. So
Exactly. The most common, if it's the most common problem that a resident manager is going to be faced, or the building staff are going to be faced with.
Gotcha.
Also, how to prevent or put out fires, and what the limit of that is. Knowing when to back off and say, hey, you know something? It's too dangerous for me to try to put out this fire. We go through all the fire, ABC, what all the different types of fire extinguishers do. Most of the building staff never pulled the pin
Right.
on the fire extinguisher, so we do that.
Right.
That's a hands-on type of
You mean?
thing. that
Yeah,
we do.
you're right. You know what? The last time I think I pulled a pin on a fire extinguisher was years ago. I haven't done that on a regular basis. I think you should just get into the habit, and also big ones too. The ones that are the heavy tanks that are, those are things that I think getting your hands on and just getting familiar with is a necessity. I think that's overlooked for a lot of RMs.
Yeah, and getting them inspected and then turning them over. If you leave an ABC fire extinguisher in one place for 7 months and don't shake it, it'll cake on the bottom. So when you really go to need it, it's not there for you.
Right.
So we do. So the resident manager really has to educate the staff. We go over this type of stuff, and we do extractions. How a resident manager would go into an area only with 2 exits to make sure that there are 2 exits that he can get out of, and have the staff hold him by the belt, ready to pull him out or extract him.
Right.
In case he's overcome with carbon monoxide or some type of fumes. So, and when enough is enough.
Right.
And we show films about, if you Google Christmas tree fire on Google's, you can see that in 30 seconds that a whole room is destroyed. In 30 seconds, and there'll be a timer. It's an interesting video that we show the people in our class.
Okay.
Any questions about that second class?
No? Oh, Jennifer? No, we're good.
Okay, the third class is probably I find one of the most interesting, because it's the third and fourth class. It's about medical disasters. We went over the lady falling out of the bed. But there are so many incidences of problems in buildings, like shock. We spend a lot of time on teaching what the symptoms of shock are to the people who take our course. Of course, there's anaphylactic shock. If you call 911 and someone doesn't have an EpiPen available, how is a resident manager going to save the life of that kid that may have eaten a peanut butter cookie or gotten stung? And you could do that by taking Ventilant as a bronchodilator and pumping it into their lungs, even if because it's a bronchodilator. That once happened on my boat where I was at the sea, and Tim.
Yeah.
He's one of the guys.
Of course. Yeah.
Great
RM.
Yeah. One of his kids had an anaphylactic reaction, and I had Ventilant on the boat.
Oh, wow.
And I was able to mitigate that.
Okay.
To call the Coast Guard, it would have taken maybe 15, 20 minutes, and she would have been dead.
Wow. Okay.
So, how to use Ventilant in cases of anaphylactic shock.
Right.
How to determine what cardiac shock is, neurological shock. My expertise is in septic shock, because I teach biological and chemical weapons. So what to look for, but we'll get to that. But hypovolemic shock happens all the time in buildings.
Right.
Staff will come in as you're sitting there, and there's a puncture wound that one of the staff members who were fixing something went through his hand. And how we are able to put pressure on that wound to stop the bleeding, or a knife wound or a gunshot wound that might have happened in a building that went off by accident, or maybe on purpose.
Right, right.
So you always call 911, but if somebody's bleeding out, you have to know to put their legs up high, to maintain a slower heart rate, if you can, by calming them down, because if they're excited, their heart's going to be pumping faster and faster, and they'll be bleeding out. But we'll get to that further down the line. But there was so many medical incidences that resident managers could respond to and do respond to that could save people's lives. At 372 CPW, the resident manager was called at 2 o'clock in the morning after somebody called 911. The lady was unconscious. Her daughter, who lived with her, was a nurse.
Right.
But was frozen. And she was unable to react to her mother's being unconscious and not breathing. The resident manager, as a result of taking our course, repositioned, opened up her airway, and saved the woman's life.
Wow. Wow.
So
quite dramatic.
You hear about this in quite a few buildings.
So Hank, yeah.
And it would have been, I think from it was 8 minutes that the emergency services were there on the scene. And they told the super, if it wasn't for what he did, that woman would have been dead.
Wow. So do you get these? Did you start these classes after getting these going through these examples? Like you've collected a lot of examples from resident manager experiences. Did you how did this whole thing start? Did you go?
It started from my experience as a medic in the military.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's how it started. But what had happened is that we started hearing more and more stories of resident managers responding to, at 2 o'clock in the morning to emergencies. And so we were better able to felicitate a response that saved people's lives.
Gotcha. Okay. Because it's great that you have all these examples that are probably really just distressing to that person when it happens, but it's great examples for the rest of us because we're prepared. I mean, I would not know what to do if a young child was going through some sort of as you said, breathing, I guess, shock or breathing problems, or I always felt that's leave it for the experts, the medical professions. But
one of the things that resident managers, we teach them how to use is an oximeter. It's a thing that you put on your finger. You buy at the drugstore for $30.
Okay, that's great. I'll buy one.
If that goes under 90,
yeah,
you better call somebody.
I gotcha. Okay, so there's simple stuff out there for RMs to use as tools to help people. And RMs don't really, we people in this industry, superintendents, RMs, we often think that our work is about the building itself, taking care of the building. But this is a really unique angle on helping the residents that live in the building. I mean, you're as an RM, as RM or superintendent, you're indirectly promoting the welfare and the safety of the residents who live inside the building. But this is almost like a direct. You're training to be hands-on in these dangerous situations. So it's an interesting perspective on what the responsibility or powers of an RM are.
Exactly. And while they're going through this medical aspect of this course, they're learning how to bandage one another. It's one thing showing a film of doing it. It's another thing when they're actually physically have to bandage the guy next to them, or take a pulse, or use an oximeter on the guy next to them.
Right.
What we also do is we create stories in the class that would be typical of people having problems in a building, maybe dementia,
right,
not taking their medicine, and having train, we create stories, we use the people in the class as actors to create those stories, to create a scenario, and the resident manager next to them has to figure out if they're in shock, if they forgot to take their medicine, to ask certain questions.
Wow. Okay. So it's like a simulation room where you go through the motions of how you respond to an emergency situation. Jennifer, you were saying you had mentioned simulation rooms before for a different thing. I guess that's where someone you're not an RM, but you are somewhat, you're still in this industry. You deal with a lot of stuff that we do. You would be able to benefit from these classes, do you think?
Oh yes, of course, because it's really hard for me to find these classes, especially to really practice and experience like those situations in person. I think that would benefit much more than just reading it or just watching some videos.
Yeah.
I think it's a great educational tool to have those kinds of simulations.
We're actually going to show the simulation room. We found a video,
Oh,
a couple
really?
videos on YouTube
Wow.
that will kind of show how that simulation. It's pretty cool. It's really intense. You have, these are great actors too. They're really, kind of dramatic and yelling out in pain. And I'm sure Hank trained them personally for that. But okay, I'm sorry, Hank. Go ahead. So we're on class.
Okay, so we do a lot, and we keep on going back
Okay.
to the medical aspects when we go through other. We just do reviews constantly. The next class is about acute stress disorder. What happens when there's panic in a building?
Right.
Or a person. So we'll have a psychologist talk about acute stress disorder. Resident managers don't get involved in chronic stress disorder. You go to a doctor for that.
Okay.
Or post-traumatic stress disorder. But during an incident of a mass casualty disaster, you could have people that are in psychological shock.
Right.
They're either underactive, and I've seen this, staring out into space, not being able to hear what's said,
Right.
not being able to see what's said, or see what's happening in front of them.
Right.
They're almost in a catatonic situation, and you have to move those people. And there are also people who are flipping out, screaming and yelling, and that could be contagious
Really?
to other people.
Okay.
So the resident managers and building staff are taught how to isolate those people and
Okay.
try to work with them one-on-one.
Wow, that's a great idea. Yeah.
So that you can deal with acute stress disorder.
Right. Right.
So after the lectures on what acute stress disorder is, which everybody forgets, what we'll do is we'll create a situation in the class where we'll pile chairs on somebody with a top over it, and they're stuck under 8 feet of a building collapse.
Right.
And the resident managers, after listening to the lectures, now have to go and form a rapport with the person, get medical information, get his name, get telephone numbers, get family members' numbers so they can contact family members, and be able to try to deal with that person so that they're not going to do more injury to themselves.
Gotcha.
And to accept the fact that if they're under 7 or 8 feet and the building fell on them, that they could be working with them for a half an hour, and then there's no response, and they bled out. So you have to stick a pole in and move on to someone else. But after working with someone for a half an hour, 45 minutes, and developing a rapport, that affects the resident manager or the building staff themselves. You know, that's a pretty traumatic situation.
Sure. It's like a bond. It's like a bonding that occurs, right?
Exactly. It's an important bonding that we try to promote,
Right.
and we show them how to promote. And it's awkward for them to. It's funny to see how you could give a lecture and then have them go to the scene, work with somebody who's in need of that type of psychological help, and how awkward it is for them to try to bond or to look for a bond. And then we teach them how to bond
Right. Gotcha.
and collect information. So it's hands-on.
Right. And I love the fact that it's actually being conducted. It's trained by a clinical psychologist, which
Right.
really helps to put some real authority behind what we're learning.
Yeah.
Well, a clinical psychologist is a specialist in acute stress disorder.
Gotcha.
Okay, there are a lot of countries where where bombing is frequent, almost every day, and people that live in villages in those areas develop certain techniques
Right.
that help, and we try to bring those techniques to the United States.
Gotcha.
As well. So we don't just use an American clinical psychologist. We bring techniques from other countries that we found that work well also.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so that's acute stress disorder. I'm going to jump to class 7 and 8, which
Okay.
is about search and rescue. And what we're teaching resident managers to do is sort of push the envelope. It rarely happens, but if you have to search a room, we have the resident managers blindfolded, holding on to the pant leg of the next resident manager on the floor with a gas mask in complete darkness,
Right.
with fake smoke in a room, with a person calling out for help. If they release them, if anyone on that line, or the last one on the line, releases themselves from the wall, they're lost in that room. So we spent some time, and this is a big bonding factor, where we have groups of 6 people going in to pull somebody out on a stretcher that we use in a dark room. And they're sweating up a storm when they come out.
Right.
And then we go over what they did right and what they did wrong. A lot of times I'm the victim in that room because I don't want somebody to get hurt. And sometimes they don't always move people or support their neck in terms of getting over objects. So I'll stop the drill, or one of our instructors will stop the drill. We have a safety person in that room doing that.
Wow.
They also have to learn how to use ropes, and we have Nepalese people that teach them.
Really?
People who, climb Everest.
You said
they actually
Sherpas.
teach them in case the floor falls down.
Right.
We want to make sure that the resident manager doesn't go down with the floor.
Right. Right.
So we practice in the stairwell of belaying and rappelling.
Gotcha.
And that goes over really big. A lot of people love that part of the course. It's detailed. It's making knots. It's emphasizing that they're not experts at doing this.
Right.
That it takes a long time to learn how to do these techniques. We also do a technique of moving a person that's in a room that's engulfed in fire or where the room is being destroyed. They have to move that person in 30 seconds. And the fire department is helpful because there are a lot of techniques that firemen use in terms of moving people very quickly using a rope,
Okay.
using line. And we teach them how to do that. within 30 seconds, they have a person out of that room. So that's hands-on again.
Right.
And the resident managers and the building staff love this hands-on. To lecture them or to show them, to model it,
Right.
is nothing compared to the mistakes that they make when they have to do it themselves.
Right. Right.
You could model something from today to infinity, and if they actually do it themselves, week after week, for 5 minutes before the class starts, they get it.
Right.
Okay, so search and rescue techniques, cribbing is.
That sounds
very
like a fun
important.
class, by the way.
What's that?
It sounds like a fun class, by the way.
It is. It's a fun class. Cribbing is also important. What happens if a large object falls on someone? How to remove it? How to get that object off that
Wow.
person?
I've always thought that. I mean, that's been a kind of a recurring nightmare. Like, what do you do to, like, how do you, remove, do you have to cut? There's this one thing that I saw where a hiker, like, had a rock or got his hand stuck under a rock, couldn't get it out, so he ended up cutting his hand off to get to.
That's like cribbing. I saw the movie. That was a great movie. That was a true story, by the way.
Yeah, it was yeah.
Yeah, it was a great movie. Cribbing is that if a large object, like a bookcase, mostly in earthquake zones,
Okay.
fall on somebody, you could work with 3 or 4 people by putting blocks and levers underneath a large object, whether it be a car or a bookcase,
Wow.
or something that fell on one of the staff,
Right.
and how to remove it. Of course, you call 911, but it's like a jack
Right.
that is in different areas that are jacked up simultaneously, so you can remove a person
Right.
from under a building or under a heavy object
Wow.
if a building collapses.
Right.
So we do so we do that with cribbing too, but they do that. They actually physically have to do that.
Gotcha. That's a great. That seems like a fun class too. I mean,
Yeah, the class 9 and 10 is sheltering in place.
Okay.
And that has to start with chemical weapons. We start our course showing people how to do that, instructing people how to teach their residents how to get into a bathroom, how to cork around the doors so no airflow comes into an area. So that's sheltering in place.
and that's something that we do on a normal basis. People in our industry is caulking, right, to prevent water from spilling into an area that you don't want it to spill into. But in this case, you're using it as a countermeasure to a terrorist attack.
Or a chemical weapon
Or
event.
chemical
It could be-
weapon
It could
event,
be an
okay.
industrial chemical weapon. One of the
Ah.
largest was in Bhopal, India, where Union Carbide had an accident. I think killed 50,000 people in India and went out of business. Union Carbide was a huge chemical company, and there was an industrial accident
Wow.
where within, I don't know, a half an hour, 50,000 people were dead.
Oh wow,
So
very scary.
not only for
What do you? I mean,
at,
yeah. I'm gonna just kind of create a global catastrophic scenario here. But if there was an event like that, is there any hope to try to survive? I mean, it's 50,000 people die in a span of 30 minutes. I don't see myself being a survivor.
no, you can if you shelter in place.
Okay.
And you're breathing the air in the bathroom,
Okay.
and you have water in the bathroom to decontaminate. But every crack around the diverters, around the windows, if there is a window in the bathroom, taping up the vents.
Right.
That would give you enough time to depending upon the wind conditions, to disperse the chemical event.
Okay.
think there's an acronym. The solution to pollution is dilution. So in chemical events, we say that because if you can wait it out and shelter in place, sometimes that's your best option. Especially if you have, in some countries, every apartment has a gas mask in it. Or a crib that has a device that'll filter air to a baby's crib. So we talk a little bit about sheltering in place.
Okay.
Okay, so where I get into the picture, where I do my lectures are in class 12, where I do pandemics, and by the way, this was put together before COVID. So when we put pandemics, there are a lot of pandemics that we were worried about. Ebola was one of them that could spread like wildfire.
Right.
Marburg
Oh my God, we had that Ebola thing just a few years ago, right?
Yeah, and
Or several years ago, yeah.
So did the African countries involved. A lot of medical people died, but they give up their lives containing Ebola. But there are a lot of biological problems. The longer what's the word I'm looking for? The symptoms, the more spreadability from one country to another. If the symptoms like Ebola happens very quickly, usually it burns itself out in a village. It could be contained. But I talk about smallpox because that's an 11-day R factor. It takes 11 days to show symptoms, even though you've been exposed. And you can infect, at least back in the 70s and 80s, 20 people from one case of smallpox. There were 20 tons that the Russians made of genetically engineered smallpox that disappeared. And nobody knows what happened to them. So I go into a lot of detail about different biological and chemical weapons all over the world that are stored by many countries. We had an event during 9/11, during those attacks, where we were giving smallpox to monkeys in the CDC to try to find drugs that would be effective against smallpox. So we were experimenting with monkeys during that attack. Had those planes hit the CDC, smallpox would have been out in a naive population.
Right.
And when you're talking about genetically engineered smallpox, you're talking about smallpox that blows through immunity,
Right.
which of course now no one has because no one gets smallpox vaccines anymore.
Right.
It was only after 9/11 that Bush started manufacturing smallpox vaccines. But with genetically engineered smallpox, and we go into how easy it is to alter either a virus or a bacteria to make it more virulent.
Right.
And of course, we all remember the anthrax attacks in the buildings and how building staff were wearing either gas masks or masks and handling the mail.
Right.
In New York.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a very tense, anxious situation. Yeah, time.
It affected few people, but because it was a terrorist attack, and I go into a lot of detail about that attack, and which was in my mind unsolved.
Right.
We go into a lot of detail on the fear that it produced, even though very few people actually died of inhalation anthrax. So I talk about inhalation anthrax because it's a perfect biological weapon. I talk about smallpox because it's so easy to genetically engineer it.
Right.
And also I talk about Yersinia pestis, or the plague, because it's not only endemic in the United States on prairie dogs, but it happens in a lot of countries where and pass it on to people. So it's now we have antibiotics, but those responding to those types of disasters that are part of our course have to take preventive, prophylactic drugs if they want to help out in schools or auditoriums or in the Javits Center or in large areas if there is a biological or chemical attack.
Right.
And so they have to know that going into it, it's not just handing out medicine. And we talk about how to guess, how to hand out medicine by weight, by body weight, who to hand it to, who not to hand it to, how do we refer it to other doctors who may be on the side, because these drugs have to be handed out very quickly in a terrorist, a biological attack.
Okay.
We'll have to go into a lot on chemical weapons. Biological attacks, you have time. With chemical attacks, especially sarin attacks, we have the resident managers cutting off clothing and decontaminating people.
Right. And just
they have to actually do it.
Yeah, and just to let everyone, I think it's just a reminder for everybody, including myself. I mean, as you know, outlandish kind of 007 feel to these stories, a lot of this stuff is real, and it actually happened in cosmopolitan, developed, mature societies, right? Communities or countries. The sarin gas was in Japan, right? Oh, okay.
Chemical attacks happen in Syria, whether they be chlorine attacks
Right.
Sarin gas attacks.
Right. I think there's a sense that it happens in these, war-torn countries, and
No, it happened here too.
yeah, I think that's where we need to connect. That it's important to learn, especially if you're in a position of caring for or handling the safeties of many people. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to just work off your last comment. In sarin gas attacks, we separate people into three different groups: ambulatory and breathing, non-ambulatory and breathing, and non-ambulatory and non-breathing. And in those cases, in the last scenario, we just don't do anything at all. We just get gas masks, put them into an area because it's a hot zone, and prevent other people from coming in contact with those dead people. But
Okay.
we can do, and resident managers could do, and other people could do, is open up people's airways with Ventilant as a bronchodilator to keep them breathing until they can get a shot of atropine from a professional rescue, like the medical reserve unit or a hospital unit. Hospitals don't want people coming into the hospitals that are contaminated. So we train people how to decontaminate before they get into the hospital.
Right.
Because you'll sack a hospital otherwise.
Right.
You'll sack their equipment.
Right. Which is what we're experiencing. I think we're more aware of the detrimental effects of overloading a hospital through this pandemic, right?
Exactly.
From this COVID time, I think we're more understanding of the urgency behind overloading our healthcare system. So,
Exactly.
right.
So this is where resident managers and building staff could be trained to respond to those types of, as long as their building is secure, if they wanted to, they could respond to those situations where if there was a mass casualty. So I go into a lot of detail, a 3-hour, very detailed, very fast-paced,
Right.
very technical. However, they have to be involved in decontaminating, and they get it wrong.
Right.
They have to victim's head,
Wow.
because
Right.
that affects their breathing. They'll
Right,
get
right.
in their respiratory system.
Right.
So they have to go through that.
This is in
And,
class
They
13.
also have to be healthy enough
Right.
to work with gas masks and protective equipment. So
Right,
they're
right.
in suits, they're in mop suits. The
Wow.
resident managers and the building staff.
Yeah. I'm actually looking forward to showing this video.
All right.
But we'll, yeah.
The next to the last class is a drill, where it's a tabletop drill.
Right.
Where I created a scenario. I call it Red Cobra's Shaking. It's about a large sarin gas attack in Manhattan, which, by the way, almost happened, and Ray Kelly stopped it. It was an attack against the subway system.
Oh, wow.
And while he was in office, he stopped 16 terrorist attacks, changed the whole nature of the New York City Police Department to make it a joint task force with good communications. But he stopped a sarin gas attack, so it's not like it's theoretical.
Right, right.
Anyway, next to the last drill, that tabletop drill, is all theirs. They break up into different groups. They may have 2 search and rescue groups in the class. They may have a logistics, a traffic control, 2 medical groups in the class. And they all have to work together to come out with a plan for the scenario that I present.
Right.
To get them to stop talking about their plan is difficult to do, because they get so involved in the tabletop drill that I have to just shut them down, yell at them to stop. Now it's time to make a presentation to the class on what the plan of action is.
Gotcha.
And then we critique it, what they did right and what they did wrong. The very last class is the one that you're talking about, is where you're going to show a video of the last class drill, which is where people get suited up, they get harnessed up, they're responding, going into a room that are filled with surprises. And I'm not going to give out the surprises that the resident managers face,
Right.
but they're typical surprises in their buildings
Okay.
of things that can happen if a room explodes and people are trapped inside their building, and how they overlook some of those simple things because they're so juiced up, their adrenaline is so heightened that they miss a lot of things that could kill them.
Okay.
So they have to extract people, get them into triage, treat them medically. Again, we do, what went right and what went wrong.
Right. So
And that's pretty much the end of the class.
so let's see this video that you have. So the simulation room, and I want to see. Maybe you can help us understand what's happening in these videos. Give me one sec here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play this for us. This is actually the beginning of the.
It's a bomb blast drill.
Okay.
And bombs had been planted in backpacks in a room in a building that was either having some type of event, and the resident managers, of course, call 911, but they had to respond to a partial collapse of the building, of the room, not building, of the room, and rescue people in the room.
Okay.
So we had kids in the room, we had senior citizens in the room, we had dogs in the room, and their response, they had to crawl through a tunnel of debris. They had to clear that tunnel. They had to set up communications. Most of the time, the biggest criticism of bomb blast drills is poor communication from the incident commander to the people on the front line. We always send in one person first to evaluate the situation, or one person as a search and rescue with a medical personnel, so that he can report back what logistics that they need, what medicines, what they know, what bandages, what they need, how many people they'll need to rescue people. And we throw surprises in that completely go unnoticed, that the resident managers because they're hyped up. You know, it's a very realistic drill. It's
Right.
smoke, it's dark, people are screaming.
Well, this is the situation before the simulation starts, but you can see that everyone's acting, right? The blood on the clothes is fake, but it's clearly a room a situation that's meant to simulate some sort of a disaster. Should I press play?
Well, yeah, you can. I don't see it, but I just see you. Since I did since I always do these drills, they have to, they have to use everything that they learned in the course
Right.
to rescue people without harming themselves. The worst thing that can happen, the most embarrassing thing that can happen, of course, is rescuing the rescuer. We don't want that to happen. So we don't play cowboy. We don't want to.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Don't put yourself in jeopardy to the point that now you're going to take up important resources.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, this would be helpful even if you're not a resident manager.
Yeah, it's actually, Hank was saying that it's great for property managers. It's great for.
Not so for property managers.
Oh, I thought you said that.
Managers, they're not on the
They're
scene.
useless. Property managers are.
The property managers get involved with insurance after the fact. They're not on scene. Resident managers, building staff,
Right.
those are the people that are there when the disaster happens. The property managers are not on the scene.
Gotcha.
I mean, they could take the course. We love them to take the course, but the thing is that it's much more important for the resident managers and their teams and their staff to take the course than it is property managers.
Gotcha.
What
Gotcha.
if this happens in the property manager's building?
Property manager's building that he's gonna have to put on his gear and join the crowd.
Yeah, the one that he lives in.
Right. If he lives there, he's gonna have to. I think that I know some property managers that actually would love to take this class. I mean, I think they're more than not only capable in knowing a lot of the superintendent stuff, but this stuff will really just kind of expand their knowledge. And I do know a few property managers who I think would be excellent in this. But
Yeah,
It would be good for, I think the benefit for property managers is to have the logistics in place. So if there is a disaster, that the resident managers have what they need to respond.
right.
But property managers are going to get involved at the end of the disaster.
Right.
Writing reports, dealing with insurance companies,
Right.
that type of stuff, which is important.
Right. Well, yeah, I know. I shouldn't be laughing because it's. But I know what you mean. There's a lot of other stuff that has to be done.
I think we can have a link down
Yeah.
in the description so that people can.
So all this yelling, yeah, I'll have to link down for that. But just to, you're right. For people listening to the podcast,
It's like, what's
it's
happening?
yeah. Don't worry. It's not anything happening in this room or Hank's boat is fine. I think this is just a simulation. And as part, which class is this, by the way, Hank? Is this the last class? It,
You need the very, very last bomb blast drill that you're trying to show.
Yeah.
I don't see it because something happened to our link here. I see you. I don't see myself.
okay.
But that was a bomb blast drill in a room in a residential.
So you're showing it like people who are sort of going through shock, and obviously people who are injured that need to be moved, and I saw some smoke.
The end.
Oh, no problem. We're just talking about putting a link to these videos in the podcast on YouTube so that people can go there and look at these by themselves and see how the class is like. It looks great. I mean, it definitely, you have the smoke there, you have the darkness, flashlights, people screaming,
Great actors.
moaning. Yeah, I mean, you really, this is definitely helps someone to sort of put themselves in the mindset of what it would be like. So I think that's great. And once again, a lot of effort on your team's part, because to put this together with all these actors and all these different professionals really is a great accomplishment.
The purpose of any disaster is to take confusion and to try to make it less so.
Right.
Because any disaster, no matter how well prepared you are, there's going to be massive confusion.
Right.
And so it's about trying to make it so that you can work in a situation where you can help people.
Right. So just wanted to, before we give the listeners some information about where to go for this class, and we can also provide some information on the podcast as well. What it looks like in the last class you're awarded some sort of certification. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, they get we walk them through and help them with about 4 or 5 FEMA certificates, which you saw on people's walls.
Right.
We've trained over 1,000 resident managers and building staff in these classes, and other people as well. So they get this certification. They also get an ID card, a FEMA ID card, so that as long as it's not a crime scene, the police department usually
Right.
honors that card if they have to cross police lines to, let's say, I don't know, get gas for a generator for a building,
Right.
or to respond to a team, to join a team. So the police department are really they see us as an added-on benefit.
So do you get the class participants who finish the class get a FEMA card as well? So FEMA is issued by the federal government, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a FEMA card. I think they have to renew it. I think there's a date of renewal on it, which we renew.
Right.
And then Pete takes care of all of that. He takes care of the paperwork,
Right.
The incident command system,
Right.
which I find extremely boring, but he loves it.
So
And
yeah.
the chain of command,
Right.
which is important. So that's pretty much the course.
I'm actually showing you.
As best as I can communicate it now, I think the thing that's important for this course is that the more hands-on you could be, the more empowered you are. Listening to a lecture or being in a university, listening to a lecture doesn't have the same impact that it does when you actually feel uncomfortable and have to push through that uncomfortability to actually do hands-on
Right.
things. You learn that way best
Right.
by
Right.
doing.
Right. Right. I totally agree with you. I think getting your hands dirty is definitely the fastest way to really have it set in to your mind so that you don't forget that when things do happen. Although, in this pandemic times, you're limited in whether you can have this open class, right? And I guess you guys haven't been, you guys didn't teach last year, right?
No, we couldn't.
Okay.
What we'd like to do, depending upon the situation in September, is put part of the lectures, which you can help with, on Zoom.
I would love to help with that. I'd be honored.
Okay.
And so just let me know. I'll bring my camera equipment over, and we definitely want to take that information and pass it forward in a legacy. So that would be truly an honor. Also, I just saw another YouTube video where you're disarming an active shooter. So that's a pretty intense class. I can't imagine that I'll just know what to do after reading about it. I think I'm gonna have to learn how to pile on that guy and start swinging in order for me to get really ready for something like that.
A lot of the resident managers have contacted me recently, not so much for the active shooter part of it. Have contacted me because they're very concerned about crime. And it's a really tough situation. I have some pretty strong opinions about that I'm not going to really share on a YouTube thing, but good situational awareness and de-escalating a situation, and when that doesn't happen, making sure that if you have to respond, if your life is in imminent danger, that you do so in such a way that I don't know how to put this nicely, but that you do so in such a way that the person attacking you, if your life is in imminent danger, will no longer be able to attack anybody.
Right. Gotcha. Wow.
That's a great point.
But they're very, very concerned about crime. Not so much active shooter,
Right.
but crime around their building.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that is a scary thing that if you're not prepared for it, you can't freeze up, right? You can't freeze up and not know what to do. And I think as I think about
the best thing is extracting yourself.
Yeah.
Is walking, is getting away, running away. But if you can't,
Right.
You have to be able to respond in such a way that they're not going to hunt you down anymore. Because that's what's happening now. People are getting arrested for physically attacking people. They get booked and released because there's no bail. So they have the complainant's name. Yeah, they have your address and they have all the information of who made the complaint.
Right.
So what do you think they're going to do?
Right. So what they would do obviously is go and try to hunt you down.
Exactly.
So you're in a position where you have to prevent that. And can you tell us a hint as to what that would be?
No.
Top
Does
secret.
it?
I'm not going there.
Okay, we'll talk about it off camera. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Well,
And
I have one more question. It seems like the course it looks great. I would love to take this course. But it seems like it's for larger buildings, at least 100 units and above. Would you recommend this class to a part-time super or porter who's in smaller buildings like 50
or 20 units or 10 units or 9 units?
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard the question. Could you,
Oh, you want to?
because she was far away. Jennifer was
Oh,
a
I see.
distance. But it would be good for part-time supers to take the class. Anyone can take the class because also with the certificates, it's you go in front of a co-op or a board that's trying to hire you because you want a position that's a better position, and you come with these FEMA certificates in terms of being able to protect the safety or concern about the safety of the people, not only the mechanics of the building. That's got to help you.
That's a huge plus. I agree with you. I think that's a wow factor for me. If I know that, especially the bigger the building is, and more residents are there, you definitely want them safe. So that's a huge credential boost.
That you've been through
Right.
these scenarios, and that you have some idea of how to respond to that.
Right. So so Jennifer was asking whether you would recommend this for supers or porters of smaller buildings, because there's a lot of buildings that are 9 units in size.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Especially if you're looking to promote your career, that's not the reason to take the course. To take the course is so that you can help people.
Right.
But if you're going for an interview and you have these certificates and you've gone through this hands-on training, in part hands-on training, not all of it is hands-on training. My lecture, which is technical, is not hands-on.
Right.
It's only partly hands-on. We have to do decontamination. But it's got to help you in terms of finding a better position if that's what you want to do in your life, if you want to be involved in the real estate community.
And also there are elderly that are in these smaller co-ops, smaller buildings as well. I mean, we had 2 people pass away in their, 2 seniors pass away in their apartments, and who knows if there was something that, if they were able to. Actually, let me go back there. There was a cleaner of an apartment that passed out. I think she got sunstroke or a heat stroke or something, and she passed out. And the porter had found her in the apartment, lying on the ground. And
alive?
I'm sorry?
Was she alive?
She was alive. Apparently, she had some sort of heat stroke. So he was obviously. We got the call in, and we tried to figure out what to do. Of course, we called 911 first, but during that short time that the ambulance showed up, was on the way. I believe there was some sort of first aid that was administered. This is years ago. So I think definitely situations like that occur. And personally, I was in one where I had a resident's friend staying at the apartment. That resident called me and said that her friend was not picking up the phone, and to see whether I can find out if something happened to him, and to go into the apartment. And when I tried to go into the apartment bolt was on, so I couldn't get in. But when we went around through the window, the fire escape, we saw him lying on the floor.
Oh my God.
And he had fell and hit his head. So we had we broke the door. We went in. The person that showed up, luckily, he was actually well versed in first aid, and we called the ambulance. So things like that happen in smaller buildings. So I can imagine that it will be a great opportunity for every super, regardless of what size building you take care of.
Right.
So thank you very much. And also, I last thing is I'm going to put your information out there of how to get in touch with you in terms of this class. It is a class that has these instructors are paid. There's a lot of things that go into here that cost money. So these classes do have a price tag on them, right, Hank?
Right. Yes, you do.
So there's in larger buildings, often the building is able to pay for these classes for the super, just like additional continuing educational class. But in smaller buildings where you do have part-time supers, you may have less of an opportunity to do that. But I think Hank and I may work on some other options for
Like scholarships? Is
Schol-
that scholarships?
Are we gonna have scholarships? Are you gonna have scholarships, Hank?
Yeah, there are people that that I've put into the class
Right.
that have helped me in the class.
Okay.
They operate as, they'll bring shorts and we'll tear up their clothes so that people can decontaminate them. We give them discounts, or there are situations where people are helpful,
Right.
and they may not be able to afford the $350. So, we just want to train people. We got to break even.
Right. You do
because
have.
we have to pay for the room, we have to pay for
Absolutely.
insurance, we have to pay for the instructors.
Right.
Yeah. So we have to break even, but the thing is that, and I enjoy it because I get energy out of running a class. In other words, the resident managers just give me. It's a privilege being with them.
Right.
And it gives me the energy to keep on wanting to do this.
Yeah. Well, I applaud you for your years and having delivered this great information and knowledge to the super community. And I think this is, as Jennifer was saying, we've looked into classes, educational classes out there for supers, and there's not much out there. There's a deficit of these classes. So definitely, and this is one great class. It may not be about how to fix a faucet. It may not be about how to work with a board member, or how to write a board report, or how to, deal with compare bids from vendors. But this is actually another angle which is super important, and I think it should be out there as a top class that super is looking to taking.
Yep, I think so too.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Hank. I appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome.
Perfect.
Okay. Hey, Jennifer, it was nice meeting you virtually.
Likewise. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, this is a great session.
Yeah, it was very inspiring, and the whole dedication that you put into this industry, it's
It's got to live on.
yeah.
Yeah.
This is amazing. This is by far the best class I've ever seen for supers.
Yeah, actually, you're right. We've taken some classes there, Hank. We know those classes, so we know we've taken those classes out there for supers, and just to say very simply, this is the real deal.
Yeah, we say quote legit.
I'm not alone in this. Pete is a big part of this.
Right.
So I think I just want to keep him in the loop.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks, gang.
Thank you very much.
Speak to you soon.
Have fun on the boat.
Okay.
Okay. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.